Okay, so let's get into this Qgis styling. This is the first episode of 2, where by the end of it we will end up with a map similar to this, but hopefully better. As a party trick, you can also switch off the light and switch it back on again. So, with a little experience in Qgis is advisable, but not required, as this will be a follow along. But if you end up with exactly the same map as I, you are doing it wrong. Learn to play and play to learn. In the first video, we will be building a vector base map and learn some Qgis styling techniques that is just so easy to implement and according to me makes a world of difference. I have shared a link to a geo package containing some OpenStreetMap data clip to a small part within Cape Town. So I'm just going to open that geo package in a new project. So I'm just dragging my geo package in there and say add layers. Okay, so here's a bunch of the OpenStreetMap layers. I'm going to start off with my street center lines. So I'm just going to drag that to the top, highlight the rest, and click on this little I button and say hide selected layers. And now I only see my street center lines. Okay, so by clicking on it, you activate the layer. And if you don't see this layer styling panel, I would advise clicking here on this icon here at the corner that says open the layer styling panel. This just makes it easier to see your changes on the fly. Okay, so with the street center lines, I'm just going to start off with making it a light gray. So now you can see that there's some lines there, but you don't really see what's happening there. So let's change that by giving it some draw effects. So there's basically two places where you can give your layer a draw effect. The first place is in the layer itself. So for instance, if I click here on the simple line and I go down there, you'll see that there's a draw effect there. But what I assume this does is it actually draws that draw effect for each individual feature, which might take some time for large layers, and sometimes it overlaps with each other and the outcome is just not desirable. So I would advise starting off with the draw effects under the layer rendering. So in here you can see that there's the draw effect. If I click on it, it activates this little yellow star. So I'm just going to click on it, and here I've got some options. So I'm going to start off with the shadowing. The way I see shadows is that if an object drops a shadow onto the ground, that means that that object is above the ground. And if the shadow falls, if the shadow of the ground falls on the layer, that means that that layer is just below the surface. So for the street center lines, I'm going to start off with a drop shadow. And just like that, your layer already starts to look a lot more interesting. But if I click here on my drop shadow, there's some options here that I can change. For instance, the offset angle, which just tells you on which side to drop your shadow, and then the distance from your feature, as well as the blur radius. So I found for the street center lines that a 0.6 is a good measurement to start off with. And then with the blur radius, I'll just go down until I find something that works for me. So if I go down, this already starts to look good. You can, if you want it more clearer, then just change the blur radius yourself. But for now, I'm just going to leave it like that. Okay, so let's see what the effect had on my layer. So if I click on the draw effect again, this is basically what the layer looked like. And just with a little drop shadow, it just makes the world of difference. Okay, but now I don't want to show the streets as a single layer. I actually want to distinguish between main roads and highways and so forth. So with the OpenStreetMap layer, there is an F class that you can use to distinguish between them. So instead of a single symbol, I'm going to choose categorized, and in the value, I'm going to say F class and classify. So now you can see that there's different colors for the different layers, for the different values. To start off with, I'm just going to click on my residential and make it that light gray again, as we had in the start. And then what I also want to do is I actually want to make that my motorways is on top of the rest of my layers, and then the primary link and so forth. The way you do that is in your advanced, you click on the symbol levels and you click enable symbols. So in here there is some values that you can change. The higher the value, the more on top that layer will display. So I'm going to keep my residential as 0. Secondary link I'm going to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so let's start with my motorways. I'm going to click on this little line here, double click on it, and it opens the style for that motorway. So I'm going to change that to a, let's make that a gray blue color. It's probably going to change a lot during the course of this tutorials. And then the width, just going to make it a little bit more. And maybe make it a lighter blue. But yeah, okay. So then, let's say I want my motorway and my motorway link to be exactly the same. I can actually right click on the style here and say copy symbol, right click on it and say paste symbol. But now I have to be wary that I've copied the whole symbol. So if I go back here to advanced and I say symbol levels, you'll see that my motorway links also changed to 6. In this case it doesn't really make a big difference because I actually want them to be exactly the same. But for now I'm just going to change it back to 5. So going to my primary links, I'm going to double click on it again, and for this I'm going to change the color to a orange and make the width like that again. Okay, but now let's say I want my primary and my primary link to have the same color, but I don't want to copy the whole style. I can actually just go back to my primary, right click on my color, copy the color, go back to my primary link, double click on it, right click on the color and say paste color. So now I have the same color, but still the symbol width and so forth is not the same. Okay, so residential we've already done. Secondary, I'm going to make that maybe a, let's make that also a brown. And just to see the changes. So this is almost the same as the primary, but not quite. So now let's say I actually want to make that layer be more distinguished, as well as my highways. I can go back to my motorway, double click on it, go to my symbol line, and this time I do want the draw effect for this line. Because I know this is the highways and there's not a lot of them, I can actually click on my draw effect and then once again click a drop shadow. And this time the shadow will be on top of the other ones. For the drop shadow, this time I'm going to make it a lot less, as well as the blur radius. In here you will see that there's also some blending modes. So you can play around with these blending modes to see what the differences are. So if you look here where the other roads are basically intersecting your highways, you see it now a lot clearer than it was when it was multiplied. So I'm going to keep it as lighten and then maybe change the color to a slightly less gray. So now your highways are more distinguished. And I'm going to try and do the same with my, let's do, the primary as well. Draw effect and drop shadow, click on it. Yes. And change it. And again, instead of multiply, lighten. And there you have it. Now I can see that here are my primary roads. And then there's the secondary, and so I'm just going to keep it like that for now. So let's go and change our water. So I'm just going to drag that to the top, click on it, and change my color to a blue. Let's make it a light blue. But this time I don't want a stroke, so I'm going to put off my stroke. Okay, so let's again go to your layer rendering, and in here again my draw effect, click on the star, and this time I want an inner shadow because I want the water to be below the surface. So if I click on it, you already will see that start to look here at the harbor that the water is there below, let's say that wall in the harbor. But there's again some things that I can change here in my inner shadow, such as the offset angle, the distance of the feature, and the blur radius, as well as the color. So I'm just going to play around here with clicking on there. Let's see if it make it a blue. And this time I actually want maybe something like that. Yes. Okay. And again, I can play here with my blending modes as well. But I actually think that multiply was good enough. For these ones, you can also play around with maybe the draw effect again, inner shadows with maybe a little less, the blur radius, so that you can see a little bit more of the light blue in there. Yeah, I think this looks good. Okay, so let's continue with our building footprints. I'm going to drag that to the top, click on it, and this time I'm going to make my building footprints. I'm going to make it almost the same color as my streets, just a little darker. So I'm going to move it down there, and maybe just a little darker. Let me zoom in. Okay, so, and again, I'm going to drop a shadow so that it looks like the buildings are actually, it just gives that 3D effect. So drop shadow, and this time I'm going to make the offset a lot less, blur radius, and this little icon here actually helps a lot to see where your shadow is and how dark that shadow is. Okay, so something like this. But almost like if you think about, let's say a satellite photo, if you zoomed out, you don't want to see as much detail as when you are zoomed in. So for instance, if I zoom out, you'll see that this stroke just takes over this whole image. I don't want that, but I also don't want to put off or remove my stroke. So if I do that, if I say no pen, and I zoom out, you lose a lot of details in there. So I'm going to keep my pen. But once again, you have your blending modes. So under the layer rendering, you have your blending modes as a layer and a feature. So the layer basically means that the blending modes will take effect on all the other layers that's in your map, while the feature one is for that feature itself, basically where it's self-intersecting styles. Okay, so once again, here on the feature, you can play around with a lot of the options available. So in this case, I'm just going to switch between lighting and screen. So if you do the lighting, you'll see that it already looks quite good. But you can already see that there's also the other detail in your layer as well, where if you choose the screen, it's a lot less. So this is just preference, but I actually like the screen one because it just, from a zoomed out level, it just looks better. But that, again, this is just preference, so please play around with it and see the styles you can come up with. So actually, while we're busy with it, I actually want my buildings to drop sort of a little more shadow here on my streets. So let's see what happens if I click on, so I'm going to take my building footprint, and this time I'm going to use a blending mode here, multiply. So over here you can see that I think there's better. So you can see that it looks like little shadows that falls on your street. Okay, yeah, so that's that for the building footprints for now. And then I'm going to choose my waterways. This is actually the last layer that we're going to style in this video. So I'm just going to click on it and change my waters to blue again. Maybe a lighter blue. This time I'm going to my layer rendering, draw effect, and choose a outer glow. So in the outer glow, once again, there's a bunch of options here. I'm first going to change my color to a blue, so it just gives that glow effect. I don't want it that much, so I'm going to change my spread and maybe the blur radius as well to make it a little bit darker. Okay, yeah, so I think that is it for the base map. Maybe something just to show that in here with these options that you have, it's the same as the layers here at the left hand side in terms of drawing order. So let's say I don't have my outer glow. For some reason I want a drop shadow for my rivers. So I'm just going to make it less to show you the effect. Okay, so now I've got some shadows there. For some reason let's make it blue. For some reason I want my shadows there, but I also want a outer glow. So if I click on my outer glow, you'll see that my shadow basically disappeared. But I can change my drawing orders by clicking up there, and there you'll see that I have my shadow as well as a glow. So just keep that in mind when playing around with these layers as well, or yeah, these styles here. But for now I'm just going to say leave out the shadow, and yeah, there you already have a pretty decent looking vector base map. And I'm just going to save that. And then for the next tutorial, I'll be showing a little bit more of the blending modes that we'll need to do the light map. And by the end of it, we'll end up with our light map where we can switch on the light and off. All right. Thank you, and see you again.